And I think if we look at, what are common traits of people that are, quote unquote struggling, is one is, racing thoughts, negative self-talk, thinking about everything that could be wrong out there, experiencing a world or a life that's not actually the moment that they're in right now. And so all change comes from the present.
So welcome once again to a Transform Life podcast with Tiffani Cappello. And I am so excited today because I have Michael Edwards with me. And I'm not going to tell you a whole lot about him except for the fact that I met Michael at a Marissa Peer training. He was training to be an RTT therapist. And there's, probably 80 people there. And I was immediately impressed with Michael. Like he just shined out. And I love all the students there when I work with them. But Michael had an energy that really attracted me. I just knew from the moment I met him that he was going to be a powerful healer. And that has proven to be true. And I'm so excited to introduce you folks to Michael and this great work that he is doing on the earth to help people transform their lives. So Michael, you take it away and just tell the listeners a little bit about yourself so they understand who you are.
My name is Michael Edwards, and as you said, I'm a hypnotherapist and coach. And I think that something that's sort of special about my journey, or that I am bringing more attention and awareness to, is I think that we move through a gradient of change, or a gradient of growth, if you will. It's like people that are in trauma and a lot of distress are kind of in one stage of the journey, let's say, and then people who are self-actualized and thriving are at another. And what's been really beautiful for me in my journey is that in the beginning, I was really, without even realizing it when I started, I had a lot of trauma to heal through. And so I really healed that, and I worked with people that were in a really similar place because we were a match for each other. And as I've kind of, grown and set myself free of that, I've really moved into this season of growth and been like, okay, what about everything life can become? What about not just surviving, but thriving? And what I've really seen is that there are all of these different stages that we go through, and there's really different advice and different direction and different levels of awareness at every stage. And I think as a society, if you want to say or like in the personal development industry and psychology world in particular, we're not great at recognizing that there's different stages and people need different things and different kinds of advice and different kinds of support in different stages. And so I think what I've become really interested in is not just going, this is my work and this is what I'm about, but understanding where people are in that journey and acknowledging and getting away from making blanket statements or making, hard fact kind of claims, and instead understanding that each person needs something different. And it's like this real kind of fluidity is the word that's coming through as we move through. And so instead of going, this is the work and this is what it is, going, okay, this is the kinds of things that happen at this stage, and this is the kinds of things that happen at this stage. And can we start to recognize the patterns, and can we start to help people move forward because I think when you give someone advice from the perspective of being further along, it can feel really invalidating to someone that's at the beginning of their journey, someone that hasn't started to kind of question and self-reflect and look inwards. So I think something that's really important to me is having a sensitivity to that, having a sensitivity to duality and paradox, and understanding that we're different, and can the work that we do meet that instead of, and have a kind of flexibility instead of being really rigid.
And you brought up a good point. A lot of people are struggling right now. A lot of people are struggling, and they are all at different places of healing. And I think those of us who are further along, often we think we're pretty far along. We think, wow, I've
Yeah.
really come a long way. And you should validate yourself and appreciate how far you've come. But it's really a continuum. We are not
Yes.
ever at the place we're going to be. And often we look back on where we've been, or we look at others who are where we used to be, and we have sort of a condescension, maybe even towards ourselves, and a judgment towards those people. I mean, not as healing professionals, but people in general. Hopefully we don't do that. But as, people in general looking back on their past and think, so embarrassed by where I was then. And not realizing that as you progress on this life journey, you are gaining greater insight and greater understanding. And there's really no standard. I think one of the things that I try to bring forth to people is there is no standard, and you need to meet the standard in order to be enough, to be a worthwhile person. That all of us are on a journey of gaining greater insight and understanding. And we do have different needs, like you said, along that journey. And we're going to require a different kind of input along that journey. So for people that are struggling, one of the things I talk about a lot in this podcast is our thinking. And a lot of people feel guilty because they know, as they're studying personal development, as they're on their healing journey, I know my thinking's not right. I know my thinking is not contributing to my own well-being. And how do you talk to people about that thinking? How do you help them transform their thinking?
Yeah, the first step is always awareness, right? So first is like we have to become the observer of our thoughts. We have to become the observer of ourselves and not just the experiencer. A big step is moving from mind and into experience, which I really believe that we experience our emotions through the lens of our body. And so a lot of mindfulness is a big part of the work that I do at that stage, is getting people to reconnect to their body. I think what gets missed when people talk about things like gratitude is it's not just about the gratitude. It's if we can be connected to the emotional experience that we're having in each moment, then we are so present with ourselves. And I think if we look at, what are common traits of people that are, quote unquote, struggling, is one is, racing thoughts, negative self-talk, thinking about everything that could be wrong out there, experiencing a world or a life that's not actually the moment that they're in right now. And so all change comes from the present. So as we kind of calm our mind and become more present with our bodies, we become more present with the now. And I can deal with the now. I can always deal with the now. It's when my mind is kind of fractured across all these things that happened in the past and all these things that might happen in the future, that my resource goes down and my ability to deal with what is becomes almost non-existent. When I bring myself back to the now and I'm connected to we talk a lot about gratitude, and so we want to be connected to gratitude and joy when we can. But then even if there's, some sadness or some anger, not being afraid of it and training ourselves to be connected to the emotional experience that we're having, it helps us become so present in the now. And I think becoming present is one of the things that gives us the ability to deal with all of the things that are causing us distress, because we can only deal with it from the now.
Now, you probably heard that phrase, and I hope I get it right. If you live in the past, you'll be depressed. If you live in the future, you'll be anxious. If you live in the present moment, you'll find peace. And that is so true. And a lot of times I realize, because I struggled with both anxiety and depression, and that statement was very true for me. And I don't think I spent any amount of time at all in the present moment. And a lot of times, if you honestly can drop down out of that world of thinking into the present moment, into what you're feeling and experience now, you could use your senses just to experience the now. You'll find out everything's okay.
Yeah.
I'm okay. Everything's okay. And that this world of thought is what is creating a lot of my negative experiences.
Totally. And I love what you're saying too, because in speaking about, when we're in this place of struggle and the things that help us break out of it, one of them is this shift in perception into self-responsibility and personal accountability. And it's really hard. It can be really hard because you kind of at the same time have to acknowledge that you're the creator of your life, and you're, responsible for whatever mess you've made. Now, people get mad when I say this. I'm not saying that we're not all dealt different hands. We are. Like, you can have been dealt a very poor hand. But there comes a point where it's like, if we want to grow, we want to evolve, we want something different, we have to take ownership. And so in that moment of awareness, as it unfolds, you also start to realize that whatever life you have is, in the language I would use, is an energetic match for your thoughts, for your emotional state of being, for the way that you're operating yourself. And so if you, want your life to start, and this is the thing, is we look, when we're in that place, we tend to look at we say, if I had more money, things would be different. If I didn't have to work, if my mom didn't, if my partner was different, if I was healthier, if I had more time, we look at all of these external things instead of realizing that very much our external world tends to be a match for what's going on in our internal world. And so the power, as we're talking about, comes from coming back to the present and starting to make shifts in that internal world. And then we start to create a different world. I see this a lot when we talk about things like anxiety and depression not being present. A lot of like really busy people will say that they have overwhelm. And when they come to you, they're like, well, I just want to like learn to manage my time better. And if I could take all these things off my plate, then I wouldn't be overwhelmed. And what ends up happening very often is that they get out of their mind and into their body and back into the present. And I get this feedback so often that it makes me laugh. And they'll say, well, I actually have more things on my plate now than when I first came to you, but I'm not overwhelmed anymore. Like, the idea of overwhelm doesn't even exist in my life, because I'm so present and I can deal with anything and I feel great. And what starts to happen is that they actually create a life that's more full, that has more spaciousness, even though they're doing more stuff. Because the old way was stuff equals busyness and overwhelm, and the new way is I have the capacity and the resource to deal with everything, and everywhere I go is where I am. And so I'm always like, there's nothing more than the moment. And it's such a kind of a perspective shift, but it's so beautiful to see as people grow through that awareness.
You brought up a really good point, because like you had mentioned with these clients, their life, the busyness didn't actually change, only the thinking about and the perception about their circumstances changed. I've seen this in my own life. I've seen it in the lives of clients. And you always meet people who say, in order for me to be happy, these 5 things, these 4 things, even this one thing is going to have to change. And sometimes that's difficult, because the very things that they require to change, they think, in order to be happy, are things that we don't really have control. But what we do have control over is that internal milieu. We have control over our thinking. We have control over our perceptions. And you mentioned earlier about taking personal responsibility. And when we feel like we have no control and we're victims, we don't look for answers. So moving out of victimhood and taking personal responsibility and saying, okay, so I can't control A, B, C, and D, or maybe I can control C and D, but not A and B, or maybe I can shift those things, but not right now. But the one thing we can shift is that internal world. We can be present. And when we make those internal shifts, the interesting thing is, as you noted, the external begins often as well.
Yeah. And I think very often when we find ourselves in that circumstance, there's a price to pay for the healing, for the growth, and there's a payoff for not growing. And that can be a really difficult thing too, because so as our inner world starts to shift, so we've got this matching, right? We have our inner world state and we have the outer world that's the match. So as my inner world starts to change, as I start to think differently, value myself differently, perceive differently, I can no longer exist in this environment as a match. So either the environment has to change, or I have to regret to become a match for the environment. And so I'll give you an example. I saw this client once, and she came to me and she was just very self-deprecating, very down. She'd had the death of a friend and it had really broken her spirit. And we worked together and she just came alive. Like, she was like, you just put the fuel back in her soul. She came alive. She was so full of light and so full of life. And then she started talking about my partner is so negative. He doesn't believe in me. He criticizes me. He's so down. And see, she never noticed this before because they were a match. And as she started to elevate herself, she felt the contrast between herself and his sort of state of being. And the thing that we always hope in a relationship is that as one person starts to grow, it will inspire the other. And she got into this thing and she was like, I need to leave him. I'm going to leave him. I'm going to leave him. And, I believe that our role is not to tell people what to do in their life, but is to just kind of like enhance and reflect things back to them. So, I was supportive through that, but overall it was her choice. And she knew, I know that she knew deep down, in order to keep this spark alive, she had to do something about this relationship. But you see, that's scary for people. I have to step into the unknown. I have to, all of these things. The payoff for staying in the relationship is that, it's safe and familiar and predictable. And the amount of times that we choose safe and predictable over what we actually desire, it's almost unfathomable. It has to do with our, survival wiring. And so it was kind of sad. I saw her get to this point where she almost left, and then she didn't, and she just slowly sank back down, and then kind of she was a little better than before, but she kind of became an energetic match for that relationship again. And so I think this is important because we talk so much about the inner world and the outer world, but it's like they're a dance with each other. And so, people will say, I want to work with you and not have anxiety anymore. And it's like, okay, great, we can do that. But if you go back to living life that you built with the anxiety, like it, the environment is a piece of that. So part of your environment has to change too. And what, like a lot of times, so that's one story. A lot of times what will happen is people get to this place and then they do start to change their environment, right? So and this is what's so beautiful about changing your inner world, is I don't have to solve the client's problems. They start to solve their own problems. So someone else in that situation, might and I want to give her credit, like leaving a partner is a big life decision. So I totally do get it. There's no shame in this. It's just an observation, right? And so whereas other people might, will have a situation like that, they're like, I've started to notice that these friends are actually super negative and they bring out the worst of me and I don't feel good when I'm around them. And these other friends that I actually wasn't as close with, I actually really love them and I'm more connected to them. And like when we're together, we speak about stuff that really uplifts me. So when someone changes in their inner world, it's like the people they connect with might actually change. And so recognizing that both matter in order to kind of really step into that evolved next level version of ourselves, I think is an important piece to discuss as well.
Yeah. And I think I think people forget, because anxiety and depression are uncomfortable. They forget that, I personally believe that your brain doesn't produce any sort of circumstance or emotion for no reason. There's a reason behind that. And sometimes that reason is that something in our past needs to heal. Sometimes that reason is something in our present life really needs to change. And sometimes it's just a result of we are believing things that are dragging us down. But I have as well have seen people who are in relationships and those relationships are abusive towards them. And, you're going to have anxiety if you're in a relationship. Most of the time, there are people who can transcend that and become that gray rock and just nothing their partner says affects them. And some people, temporarily, don't leave. But overall, your brain is going to produce anxiety if you're in an unsafe situation. And that's not a bad thing. Why are they not leaving? That's the really big question. What needs to shift in addition? There's another step of growth there of how do I transcend the beliefs that are keeping me stuck in the abuse.
Totally. And I think too, I love what you're saying, because I don't think that anything is inherently bad. So it's like, what if we look at anxiety as not inherently bad? What if we look at depression as not inherently bad? It's chronic anxiety is a problem. It's chronic depression. It's when I sit in that all the time. The experience that I've had is that sometimes anxiety is there for a reason, like you said. And so for me, because I didn't even realize that I had such bad anxiety. And after I healed it and anxiety was no longer my emotional home, when I feel it now, I'm like, what is that feeling in my chest. Is that anxiety? Like I haven't felt this in a long time, but it's usually telling me something.
Mhm.
It's usually telling me I'm doing something that I'm not supposed to do, or something's not right, or something's not safe, right? I, used to have seasons of depression, and I don't have that anymore, but I will get some of those depressed thoughts and feelings. And it's like, what is this trying to tell me? It's very often I'm not living my truth. I'm not living in alignment. I'm not really following what I'm meant to do, or I'm lacking connection. So I think it's so easy to demonize uncomfortable feelings instead of like putting them in the perspective of why is this here?
Yeah. And that's so important because I think especially that a lot of people expect that when I reach a certain level of spiritual growth, I'm going to be completely free of all negative emotions. I'm going to be existing in this place of enlightenment and nirvana. Maybe there are people that reach that state. I'm not saying there aren't. However, this is just like your physical body will create pain to let you know something's wrong. Our minds do the same thing. So we will have an emotion that's not bad, it's just uncomfortable. And that discomfort is designed to get us to take a look at our lives, the way we're thinking or the way we're living, and say, okay, it needs to change. But what we do is we experience the uncomfortable emotion and we think, I got to stop this now. Maybe if I just have some alcohol, it'll go away. Maybe if I just distract myself with Netflix. We come up with these ways of doing that, when what we should, or what we can come to the point of realization that these emotions are actually loving messengers. And when we look at it from that perspective, that becomes a real game changer for being able to grow using our emotions instead of fighting against them.
Totally. And I love what you just said, because I think it leads into the example of like different stages and different sort of advice. And so this has been a big thing for me. So I think early in our journey, so it's like stage 1, and I like to break down the stages of actualization into 4 stages. And so stages 1 and 2, a lot of the advice, and this is a lot of the sort of psychology advice out there I find, is it's very avoidant. So let's avoid triggers. Let's avoid getting angry. Let's avoid being triggered. Let's just breathe and calm and avoid. And I think that advice is so brilliant when someone's in this stage of high reactivity. If me getting angry means that I'm going to be abusive at home and damage relationships, then me being able to disengage from that anger is great. And it's not the forever solution. So can I get to a level of awareness where I can sidestep anger? Let's use anger as the example, where I can sidestep the trigger of anger when it comes. But then once I've been able to do that, can I now start to plug into the anger and process it? Because what happens is we unplug from emotions. And so very often when we're young, we experience very intense emotions in an adult context that we don't have the ability to process. And so we unplug. And so say my parents were very volatile and fought, and it would make me angry and upset. And I would unplug from that because I couldn't process. So now anger is frozen at like 7 years old. So every time I plug into anger, I'm reactive like a 7-year-old. And so the first level of advice is don't plug into anger so you don't become like a 7-year-old. But it's like having a bomb in your house and a trigger on the living room floor and being like, just nobody step on the trigger. Like, okay, but what about when family comes? Well, just be really careful. That's going to be our solution. Just nobody step on the trigger. But it's not about, like, eventually we want to disarm the trigger. And so that looks like in a safe space, plugging back in and like we physically process emotion. That's why all these new somatic practices are so powerful. We can experience the anger. We can handle anger. We can hold anger. It's that we don't want to give it to other people. It's that my anger shouldn't mean that I vent at you and now your nervous system is dysregulated because of my anger. So if that in the beginning looks like I have to go scream into my pillow, I have to go into the woods and yell, like whatever, to process some anger, what happens is that emotional 7-year-old response starts to update. And then so the next level is that we get to hold that emotion as our conscious adult self. And so for me, I've had this journey, and I used to be very reactive with anger, and now I love anger. It's one of my favorite emotions, which is strange to say but anger doesn't equal reactivity to me. It tells me what I'm passionate about. It tells me what I care about. And anger gives you energy. So instead of being reactive, if I feel angry, I channel it into something productive. And so, like say something out there in the world makes me angry. I'm like, this is wrong. Instead of being like, everybody's here and I'm mad. It's like, okay, what's the flip side of that? What do I believe in? How can I use my voice and my message in a positive way to educate people or inspire people to the contrast of whatever that thing was. And I can channel the energy my anger gives me into that without it having the encoding of like angry energy.
And I like that you brought up anger, because I think anger is the one emotion that most people will throw into the bad category. And if I say I'm afraid or I'm sad, nobody goes, oh, what a horrible person. But if you're an angry person, or if you get angry, people think, well, that's terrible. You shouldn't be angry. Especially in religious circles, often anger is viewed as a sin. But anger is just like the other emotions. It's a loving messenger. And sometimes it's just natural, normal, and healthy. If my boundaries are constantly being violated, the anger is a message to me. I need to set some boundaries of self-love and self-protection around myself,
Totally.
And, there's different reasons for anger, but that's one of the main reasons. And when we feel guilty about our anger and we attach shame to our anger, it doesn't become a vehicle for healing. The shame actually ends up producing more anger, because now we're angry at ourselves for getting angry. And we feel that because we're angry, we are sinful, bad, weak, and we're not acknowledging these healthy emotions.
And I love that you brought in shame, because so often what we do is we can compound emotion. So when we do that, we compound the negative emotion with the shame. And most of the pain that we feel when we think about uncomfortable emotions is actually the compounding of the original thing. So say the original anger was like 10%, well, you add 90% to it with all the compounding that you do. And so I think part of this conversation of growth is learning to process and neutralize the initial emotion. So they're not bad. They're just that we process and we neutralize them. And then we want to compound. When we compound, we only want to compound the like higher frequency, let's call them emotions. So when we get into joy, can we now compound the joy with like excitement and love and gratitude? And then like, that's a great place to compound. That's when we compound the good emotions. Then we get into this emotional state and someone can yell at us, who's like having road rage or something. And we just laugh because there's such a contrast in our emotional state and theirs that there's like, it just like bounces off. It's repellent because we're in such a different state. And so nothing's good or bad, but can we learn to neutralize these negative things as we process them? And then can we get better at compounding the good? I think that's the work. And I love what you said earlier too, because I used to have this as well. And I've really made an effort of normalizing, emotional experience and sort of, I don't want to say hardship, like you have to have hardship, but that not everything's perfect at even like further along. But when we do grow and evolve, what I find is that people who are more evolved, I put that in quotation marks, it's not that they don't experience uncomfortable things or setbacks, it's that they move through them really fast. Like I find that, when I'm in rooms with people like that, they'll have a meltdown and cry like, this thing. And then 20 minutes later, they're fine and they're like in solution mode and they're okay, So sometimes it's the disassociating or the suppressing or the numbing, like you gave the example with alcohol. That's the thing that slows us down moving through it. Emotions are meant to be processed. Like if you've ever cried and really finally let yourself cry, eventually you run out of tears. Have you ever had that? You get an emotional release and it's like, it's so sad, but it feels so good. And you're like, I'm so sad. It feels so good to cry. And you're like, really, maybe you put on a sad song, you're just crying. But then there comes a moment, there's just no more tears.
Yeah.
And even if you want to keep crying, like we're just done. The emotions process, because it's processing is what moves us through them, not avoiding.
And so I'd like to jump back to the point about triggers, because if we, we start out because we're raw, we have open wounds, and we need to avoid, particularly right in that phase after trauma or before the trauma's we've been empowered to deal with that trauma, avoiding triggers is an important thing. But nowadays, the message people are given is to continue to avoid triggers, and you're really not dealing with or processing emotion when you're always avoiding triggers. And that is, we end up walking through life feeling like a victim because we don't feel like we can handle these triggers. And really, true responsibility is saying, okay, I am not going to put the responsibility of keeping me from being triggered on everyone else. I'm taking responsibility for me to learn how to process my emotions and not be triggered.
Totally. So because otherwise you're just walking around like a ticking time bomb, right? But I want to say to that, and this is like, I think this is really important that we start to hold this perspective, is that I do think that there's a period that we go through where we're more reactive and we're more angry in the journey of healing. So if you want to say like no awareness, I have no awareness that the things in my past affected me. I might have some stuff on the inside that's not great, but like I might not actually be that angry. For some people, it's actually the first stage of awareness, the first opening of the eyes and realizing, hey, like the way that I was raised and the stuff that happened to me when I was young, it really affected me. Sometimes people go through a phase of being angry and resentful, and I think that that is okay. I think that we have to learn that to not like shame or make people feel bad about that while holding space for further healing. And so it's kind of this catch-22, because I think as our eyes start to get opened, we can be a little bit more annoyed at some of these things that happen. We're like this, it's almost like you become more a victim before you come less, because in the realizing that things have affected you, you're like, this stuff affected me. And as we continue, it's the realization that, and I can now move through it. I don't have to hold that forever. It doesn't have to be my story forever.
Yeah, we don't have to get stuck there in that.
Yes, we don't have to get stuck there. Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. But
it is an important part of the healing, is to come to that awareness that the struggles that I have today, and it's not like we're putting blame on people in the past, because people operate out of their level of awareness and understanding, and I've come to understand that's helped me to have compassion on the people that wounded me, and compassion on myself for the times I've wounded other people. But often we have been denigrating ourselves for so long, for our own struggles, for the personality characteristics that we possess that we view as bad or inferior. They're not bad. They are adaptations to what we were going through in childhood. And now we come to the realization that because mom and dad fought all the time, because I had an alcoholic parent or a sister with mental illness, you could name anything, that this is why I believe what I do about myself. This is why I've made some of the decisions I've made. So it's really not about declaring yourself not responsible. You didn't cause the things that happened to you. So the responsibility comes into play. It's okay, now what are you going to do about it? Because knowing about how the past contributed to your present way of thinking and being allows you to approach yourself with compassion instead of that self-denigration and hatred. And then being empowered, you realize, I'm not stuck this way. I can move forward. And that's the important piece.
Well, and not only that, but like in the and this is where like spirituality has really shifted and evolved the way that I speak about and look at things. So even as you're saying like, oh, I have this thing about me and it's not my fault, it's a response. Everything, if you look at everything as oneness, traits that we might think of being bad are actually just different level manifestations of one thing. So for example, a lot of people will talk about empathy and I'm an empath and it's a trauma response. All of that's true. Growing up in a chaotic environment and needing to be able to survey the emotion of adults creates this adaptation, which is empathy. And it doesn't always have, and so the like lowest frequency manifestation of that is I'm an empath in a way that feels like a victim. So what it means is if someone else is anxious, now I have anxiety. If someone else is depressed, now I have depression. But as we start to heal and grow, what we do is we take that empathy and we turn it inwards first. So I only take on what's outside me if I'm not connected to myself. So as I re-plug into myself and reconnect to myself and my own experience, I'm still an empath, but I'm not an empath and I take on their emotion. I'm an empath and I feel the contrast between my state of being and their state of being. And so we start to elevate being an empath up to like the gift frequency, let's call it, where I still am incredibly empathetic. I'm able to sense and feel people's emotional states, but I don't take them on because instead of taking them on, I'm feeling the contrast between me and my own. Another one that we can look at is a lot of people that really, and it was interesting because I was contemplating this for a while. I was like, why do all of these therapists and coaches struggle so much with self-doubt? Like they have so much awareness, they have all the tools, but it's such a huge thing. Well, what is about them? What are some traits that those kind of people they're very contemplative, they're very self-reflective, they're very curious. Drop all of that down to the lowest frequency. What does that look like? Doubt. A curious mind focused on self in a low frequency is just self-doubt. It's only self-doubt if every time you think a thought, it shatters your model of reality. It shatters your self-worth. If you can hold the value in yourself and be curious, then doubt becomes curiosity, and you can ask questions. You can take feedback. You can grow. So it's not that being so self-doubting is necessarily a bad thing. It's just the way that it's manifesting in your life. If you're someone that thinks about things and self-criticizes a lot, well, you might actually be really curious and inquisitive. And as you raise, your vibration and your self-worth and your self-awareness, that very thing might actually turn into one of your gifts, which is curiosity and inquiry and truth seeking. So we can look at some of these things as not even being bad, as just being qualities that have sort of this gradient of how they show up based on who we are and where we're at.
That's very interesting, and it goes back to I think a lot of self-doubt is just produced because people are busy comparing themselves with an imaginary standard that they have. They look at other people's lives and they say, well, this is what success looks like. This is what a happy marriage looks like. This is what, and everybody's on their journey and we're on our journey, and we're growing at our rate and shifting our mindset, healing the past, transforming into self-love. And we're really not in competition with anyone else. We're just growing, and it's okay to grow at your own pace and your own rate.
Totally. And when it's in that self-deprecating stuff, self-critical energy of doubt, we also miss the feedback. Like, sometimes there's feedback. Sometimes the very message that's coming through is you can do better. You can do better is a very different message than I suck. Right? It says I suck, I'm terrible, no one's ever gonna like me. Sometimes the message that we're actually trying to give ourselves is you're capable of more. But you can feel the difference in receiving those things. So as we start to learn and become more self-aware, it's like, can we get the feedback? Can we get the feedback? Can we not criticize? But can we still have that curiosity, and can we instead take the feedback? And so there's like this duality, because we're very taught like, you're amazing, you're worthy, you're lovable, you're enough just as you are, and all of that is true, and you can also grow to be more than you are. So can we hold the duality of that together, is that you're enough, you're beautiful, you're worthy, and you can take the feedback. Your self-feedback is the most powerful form of feedback. And so can you take that self-feedback without it dropping your worthiness, and can that be a catalyst for growth? Can we learn to hold all of that together? Can we learn to hold I am worthy and I can take my own feedback and grow together?
That right there was beautiful. It is such an important point, because especially with people that listen to podcasts and are into personal development and hire coaches, and they're interested in becoming better. So one of the questions you need to ask yourself is your motivation for becoming better that you believe you're not good enough, that you're not worthy? Or is your motivation for becoming better because you want to live up to that true potential that you have, because you recognize yourself as an evolving being, evolving spiritually, emotionally, and you can continue to grow and thrive, growing, stronger, wiser, better with time. So it's really the underlying belief.
And I think we almost have to find our selfish desire in the things that we want. Like we're the one experiencing our life. And so the experience that we have is the most real thing to us. And so in the vein of something like that, I love what you're saying about growing. It's like, what is it that I get out of it? And it's that I get to experience being the best version of myself. I love when I'm the best version of myself. I love the way people respond to me. I love the way it feels. I love to make a decision that's in alignment and know that I love who I am and who I'm being selfishly. Like that's a piece of it, right? And so I love what you just said about instead of going because I think I need to be better, because as long as we do it for someone else or something outside of ourselves, it'll never be enough. It'll never feel the way we want to feel. The only thing, because we're us, no one else's validation is ever going to give you the validation that you're looking for until you can give it to yourself, right? It just reinforces the way you feel about yourself. And the thing is, criticism tends to bounce off when you're doing it for yourself, because you're like, F that, that's not how I feel, And so it's like, can we grow because we want to grow and not because we think we should grow and we have to grow? And like, I think this is where everyone's different. And we've had conversations about this too. And, it's so easy in the personal development world to be like, well, you should want to manifest millions in cars and all this stuff. But like success and thriving, it means such different things to different people. So it's like, can we broaden the spectrum of that definition? Can we include things like time freedom and spaciousness? And like for me, something that I've recently added to my definition of success is the relationships that I have in my life. Being surrounded by people that I just absolutely love is success to me. Magnetizing, presenting myself in a way online that magnetizes clients that I just love having in my world because they're so aligned. That feels like success to me. And so whatever we focus on, we'll get, but we'll get, if we only ever focus on, say, money, for example, you'll probably get the money eventually, but like everything else you sacrificed because you didn't say this is part of success to me, you'll lose. And so often we see people that get hyper fixated on one thing and they actually don't get it the way that they wanted it because they weren't clear enough with themselves about what they actually want. And so again, like you're saying, can we also let our definition of success come from us and not from what we've seen or been modeled or told that we're supposed to have or what our parents want to have?
And you took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, I was just really, I was kind of had it in my brain. I'm going to say what you just said, that we don't align our perception of what we want to grow into often with our core values. We align it with what mom and dad's version of what we should be was, or what we think culturally we're supposed to be, or the tribes that we belong to, instead of really getting to know ourselves and saying, who am I as a person? That's a hard thing to kind of nail down, because we have these core values and personalities, but we're also evolving. And we can often, one of the things I teach clients is you're not stuck with any given identity. If you need to grow into a certain space to become the very best version of yourself, you can do that. You can adopt characteristics. You can become more extroverted if you want to. You can become, more articulate. You can be, if you think you're an introvert, you can still be that public speaker. We can grow, but we do all have these core values and we're on a different journey. And when we try to push ourselves into somebody else's mold, no matter what we achieve or how much money we make, if it's not the success that we really want, like you mentioned, success being relationships to you, and it is to me as well. But success to me, and we talked about this before in the past, is having some time freedom and being able to commune with nature, being able to stick my hands in the dirt and grow something, or to spend time in the woods. That's huge for me. And I would take that over a mansion on a hill and a Ferrari and all those things any day. But I'm not putting down the person who wants that mansion on the hill and the Ferrari. We're all different people, and we fit into this world in our own place.
Well, and that's, I think, where we have to start looking more at like the difference between the masculine energy and feminine energy perspective, right? So it's like, it's very easy to go, oh, the person that wants that Ferrari and the mansion on the hill is bad, or they just want to be seen or whatever. But it's like the two people can go after the same thing or have the same thing, and it come from such a different place. One person can have this wound and go, I need to be seen and need to be validated, and so I want this stuff for other people. And someone else can go, I just love nice stuff. This to me is luxury. This to me is the life that I want to live. And so I think we're really learning now to not paint everything with the same brush. I'm trying to be so conscious of this when I speak and when I teach and coach, is to not go, this is good and this is bad. Like, is to go like, what's about this? Why is it? Who are you when you're doing that thing? If who you are is chasing the rabbit hole of showing off and shiny things and not enoughness, let's look at that instead of the thing you're going after. But if who you are in your aligned state is the person that goes, this is what I want. This is what I actually want. This makes me feel good. Like, let's let that person live and thrive and not have to shame them because it's not what we are, right? Like, let's really acknowledge that we're all different. And can we hold spaciousness for that? So I'm laughing because there's literally like a furry wrapping by that. I don't know if you can hear it.
Well, you know what, too, I think it's an important point to also remember in our pursuit of personal development, growth, attaining the things we want in life, creating that life we love, that if we attain nothing but what we have in this present moment, that true joy, peace, and happiness does really come from within. I realized this during COVID. I suddenly went from having clients on my schedule to having none. People were not transitioned yet to Zoom. And I had to think about things, and your mind tends to go with what ifs when you're faced with the uncertainty. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if this happens? And my mind presented me with all sorts of terrifying scenarios. And I played a little game with myself, and it was, well, I'll be okay because, and I just kind of went with that. My mind would go, what if this happens? And I go, I'll be okay because da 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 da. I play this little game. And it was interesting because I followed that progression all the way down to, well, what if you end up, working on a tomato farm? And I thought, well, first of all, I love tomatoes. I love sunshine. I'll get a really good tan, and for some reason at that moment, I thought, you know what? I could live in a tent and be happy.
Yeah.
And once I had that feeling and that realization, it was that epiphany moment. I call them Tiffany epiphanies. Okay. Just to be
we love alliteration.
I had my Tiffany epiphany, and I realized I don't need anything to be happy.
Yeah.
Okay, that doesn't mean it's wrong for me to pursue, I want a pickup truck. I kind of want that, but I don't need a pickup truck to be happy. That true peace, love, and joy, I believe that's innately in us.
Oh, yeah.
We possess it, and I could have that. And then I had this freedom from anxiety that I had never before experienced, because when you have in your mind all of these things, this list of things that you must have or you can't live without, then that begins to take a little bit of control over you. It gets a little power over you. But when you realize that I don't need anything to be happy, I could be in joy and love and peace right now, but I can still go out and explore the world. You begin to see life as not survival, but as more of an adventure of having these experiences of life.
So I love this story. And the other day I was listening to a neurobiologist lecture, and she was saying that they'd found these two mechanisms in the brain that are like a circuit, and they can't both be on the same time, like an electrical circuit, where it's only one or the other. And the two circuits are fear and hope. And they cannot be activated at the same time. And I love that so much, because what you just demonstrated in your story, and I talk about this so much in my practice, is there's this fine line, and on one side is fear and on one side is hope. And so often what that looks like for us is, what if it doesn't work? And the other side is, what if it does?
Yeah.
And I always say to people, what side of that line do you want to stand on? And it just like, it's such in your story, it's such a subtle shift, right? Like, what if everything goes bad? What if it's all okay? And like you said, as we decide I'm going to live on this side of the line, I'm going to ask those questions. It's so profound the way that it changes our experience.
When you think about fear, we spend so much time when we're afraid in fantasizing about negative consequences that could occur. It is just as easy, and people don't realize, to fantasize about good things, to fantasize about possibilities, to dream up good things that might happen, as is to think of bad things that might happen. So, Michael, this has been a fantastic conversation, as all our conversations have been over the years since I've met you.
I'm so glad.
Yeah, it's just been such a blessing, and I think people really have a better understanding of how to deal with these emotions that make them uncomfortable. So tell people, if they want to learn more about you and your work, tell people how they could get in touch with you.
So you can find me on Instagram, Facebook, or my website, and it's all michaeledwards.live, Live. So you don't need a .com for my website. It's just michaeledwards.live. Same thing for Instagram, michaeledwards.live. Same thing for Facebook, michaeledwards.live. So to make it really easy for people to find me,
Awesome.
I've said it 3 times now. So, and yeah.
Well, that is perfect. And I'll also put that information down in the show notes, so you don't have to write it down or memorize it. You can just click and get in touch with Michael. It was my pleasure today, Michael.
Oh, the pleasure was mine. I'm so happy to see you, and thank you for having me. And it's so funny to, even when you started with the story about how we met, like I had this real full circle moment, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it was just such a, young thing. It felt like then, just doing my first training, and it feels like a lifetime ago, right? It feels like a lifetime ago and yesterday all at the same time.
Yeah, and I have more confidence in my ability to intuitively hone in on people I know have a special gift, because you have proven me right. If I could have a proud moment.
Yes, I remember. I can't remember what it was. It was, I celebrated some success, and I remember you just posting it and being like, "I knew it."
Yeah.
So good.
All right, Michael. It was great talking to you, and I know our listeners have been blessed today. Thank you for listening to A Transformed Life, the podcast that celebrates personal and professional transformations. I hope that you found inspiration and practical tips to help you on your own transformation journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe to this podcast so that you don't miss out on future episodes. I have some incredible guests lined up, and I want to share their stories with you. I would also appreciate it if you could leave me a review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps me to improve and reach more people who need to hear these stories of transformation. So thank you again for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode of A Transformed Life.